All right.
And we are recording.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nyvein, and I'm the Seneschal of Roxbury, and I will be running the first chunk of the presentation. We'll be then switching over to Ishmael, who is currently Deputy Seneschal. He'll be running the second chunk, and then we'll be back to me for the third chunk. So welcome to Rise of the Roxstars. This presentation is a case study regarding participation and retention of your members. As mentioned, I'm Nyvein. I have been the Seneschal of the Shire of Roxbury actually for almost 4 years now, so we should update this slide. I'm also a rapier marshal for both adults and youth. I've previously been the deputy exchequer. I am currently actually a youth officer. I've been an autocrat multiple times and a chronicler. I've been in the SCA for over 12 years, because again, updating the slide, and I've lived in 3 different kingdoms.
My name is Ishmael Reede. I am the Deputy Seneschal for the Shire of Roxbury Mill, and I am also a rapier marshal for both adults and youth. Previously, I have been a Deputy Chatelaine, an autocrat. I was a kingdom notable, so basically the poet laureate for our kingdom. So I have done those kinds of positions in the kingdom as well, and I've been in the SCA for over 4 years now.
So we'd like to dedicate this entire presentation to all of our rock stars, because the all hands on deck attitude that what they have has made this group what it is today. We literally would not exist without everybody in our Shire. And I want to make sure that as we go through the presentation that every individual's contributions is not overlooked. So our population growth in Roxbury Mill, starting in 2012, we had a little over 10 members. You can see that dip in the beginning, 2013 to 2014, it wasn't looking so good. Had a bit of a spike in 2015, and that was when our trajectory started about 2016, and we just kept going upwards. 2020 had 70, actually over 70 members, active members in the Shire of Roxbury Mill. And we are actually higher than that now.
Yep.
Even through the pandemic, we have been increasing our population. We have had something like 3-4 new members during the pandemic when we've been only virtual. Like, we shut down early and we have not done any in-person anything since last March. And we have still managed to gain members during that period of time. One of the important things about this slide is to notice our officer to active population ratio. That in the beginning, our officer to population ratio is pretty close. Most of our population were officers. But as we increased our membership, we increased our officers, but our population increased faster than or higher than our officer population, meaning we have more people who can take over roles than are currently in roles. So we can rotate officer positions without there being significant burnout of our membership, that we have enough people to have jobs and take a break from those jobs, that we have not, we're not overworking our membership. So current demographics of Roxbury Mill, we're actually at about, I think, 80 to 85 people out of 101 total. The 101 comes from the society demographic collection of how many members do you have in your geographic area. That's where we get 101. They do not always entirely play with us. But what we also have noticed is that folks who were previously playing with households or other groups have actually started to play once again with Roxbury Mill being in our geographic area, that they still play with their households, but they also play with our groups. So we're actually not just getting new members from outside the SCA, but we are keeping old members of the SCA who are coming back to play with our Shire. We have a Shire presence at most events in the Northern Atlantean region. We have a Shire day shade, which is basically our pop-up tent that we put up. I know not every kingdom does day shade to the same extent. We put out tents, and we have a Shire tent that shows up at events. And we enter competitions as a Roxbury Mill team. This will be important later and mentioned again later on in the presentation. Shire members encompass a wide range of SA leadership positions also. And we have folks who are new, we have folks who are group officers, we have folks who've been kingdom officers, as well as multiple kingdom notables. Okay. So recruitment and marketing, this intro section, I'll call it, has been added by popular request because we get lots of questions about recruitment and marketing. The rest of the population is about, the rest of the presentation is about retention and participation of the members you currently have, because in our opinion, putting recruitment and marketing as your primary goal over retention and participation is actually putting the cart before the horse. However, a lot of these points are still important, so we've added them into the presentation so that we can preemptively answer folks' questions rather than just getting the same questions at the end of the presentation. So things to do for marketing and recruitment. Positively reinforce curiosity. If somebody comes up and you're talking about your hobby, or if you're at a demo, everyone's like, oh, who are you? And they say, oh, are you the Renaissance Fair? One of the best things to do is to say, we're like the Renaissance Fair. We're the people who went to the Renaissance Fair and decided we wanted to do that all the time, not just during the summer on the weekends. Instead of saying, no, we're not the Renaissance Fair, they're like, oh, you're not the Renaissance Fair. Okay. And then they move on. But if you say, yes, we're like the Renaissance Fair, then you've drawn them in because they already know about the Renaissance Fair. And that's something they're obviously interested in. Another thing is to represent your weird hobby. Be friendly to people. Don't be like, oh, this is so weird. I can't talk about it ever. I can't mention it to my coworkers. I can't mention it to my other friends. They'll think I'm so weird. Everybody has a weird hobby. There are so many weird hobbies out there that people really just think are weird because it's not their work. Like, in all honesty, there are a lot of hobbies that are not mainstream that so many people are interested in. If you talk to your coworkers, to other friends, then you can get more people interested and brought back to your group. Invite, which leads into the next point, inviting people to activities. So you're talking to your coworkers, so you're talking to your non-Scadian friends. Well, you can invite them to come to your weekly meetings, to an event with you, on virtual events now, if you're talking to them. Virtual events are really accessible. You don't have to drive anywhere. You don't have to worry about paying to enter. Virtual events get a lot of new people, especially because they're getting to be a little lax on garb. So folks don't have to be like, oh, I don't have any clothes. Oh, I don't have this. They can just show up and test out. Another important thing is to update your website. Keep your website. This is so important. The website is frequently the portal to people finding your group. We have had quite a few of our new members, or new in the past few years, who only found us through our website. So your website should be accessible. It should have your regular activities on it. It should honestly, if you can, it should look modern. Like, look around at some of the newer websites that are available. And it's not always possible. It depends on what program you're using, but something that looks like it wasn't built with HTML code is frequently something that will be more inviting because it looks like you're up to date, which you are in other ways. And having an active, friendly Facebook group, not having a lot of feuding on your Facebook group. And if you need to, putting in rules for what interactions are okay or not okay in your Facebook group, because again, the internet is how a lot of folks find us. The other thing is to capitalize on luck and think creatively. Luck comes up a lot for people showing up. People will show up, and once someone has walked in the door, that is your chance to keep them there. Rather than being like, how do I get someone in the door? Capitalize on just things that happen and say, oh, hey, this person wandered in, now I get to show them around. And the last and really, really important point is to be patient. Patience is super important. A change like this does not happen overnight. If you looked at, if you notice the population growth chart on the first slide, we had some dips. It went up, we were like, oh, this is great. And then it went back down. And then it went up again. You're going to have cycles, and things that look like they'll work out won't necessarily work out. Patience is key. don't be nosy or overbearing. If you're talking to someone and they're not like really interested in what you're talking about, then stop inviting them to things. If they keep turning you down for coming to events or activities, then stop inviting them to things. Basically, your regular body language of, oh, they're not really interested, they're just being polite. Try and pay attention to that also. Don't act desperate. There are some weird stories that I've heard of people like showing up at newcomers' houses being like, why didn't you come to this event? Or being like, hey, you said you can't make it to this event. Do you need a ride? Once is fine. 3 times is not fine. You know, it's that same like, try and keep in mind your normal, polite social interactions and interact like a polite social person. Again, don't ignore body language implying disinterest, but also pivoting back around, don't ignore walk-ins to events or practices. I was at an event in a group that is fairly small in our area, and there happened to be something else happening next door. So a bunch of people wandered up to Troll to check in and said, oh, what's happening here? And the people running Troll said, this is a private event. I watched this happen and I was just flabbergasted. I was just like, these people are curious. They're like, well, obviously there's some people in weird clothing, but instead of just being like, I'm gonna ignore those people, they were like, oh, what is this? I'm curious. And they got turned away. Instead, have your chatelaine come over if you can't leave your post. I understand not being able to leave Troll, but I'm sure you know somebody else who can walk these people around and show them around the event without making them pay to enter because they don't even know what it is that they're entering. Don't turn away curious passerby from events. And also do not disparage Ren Fair, similar events, similar organizations. We are overlapping communities with these other events and organizations. The number of people who went to the Renaissance Fair first and then found the SCA, that was me. Like there's so many of us. And that was Ishmael. Like that's basically, why would you do this? Just don't. That's like shooting yourself in the foot. Another point is that there's difference between your core group and your active population. We don't really mention this later, but it's something to keep in mind. Recruitment and marketing should aim to expand both your core group and your active population. Your active population is the people who show up to practices, to activities, to events, but they don't show up to every single one. And they don't show up to the extent that maybe they don't have the time to be an officer. They can't actually give the amount of time. They can't give that responsibility. Maybe they show up once a quarter to something. Your practices, your weekly activities, your monthly activities that aren't events count as something. They count as being part of the group and they count as participating, just as events do. But not everybody can participate at a deeper level in the SCA. And this is actually desirable. You want there to be an active population who only shows up once a month, once every 3 months, every so often when they can make it, maybe frequently sometimes and then not, because you want your core group, your people who show up regularly to everything, you want them to be able to take a break. You don't want them to feel like they're either in or they're out. You want it so that they can bounce along the spectrum and be a more active participant now and less active later without feeling like they have to ditch the entire group. And they avoid burnout without leaving the group, without being like, I can't do this at all. So moving on to our core group, that should also be more than your officers. Your officers are obviously going to be part of your core group because they have a higher level of responsibility. They're participating in more things. That is generally why they and how they become officers. But that shouldn't be everyone. You want more than your officers to attend your business meetings. Your core group are frequently the people who attend your business meetings who are not officers. They are also frequently your next up in line for who might become officers. Your regulars at your fighter practice, A&S, archery, the people who show up every single week. That's your core group. Do you see them all the time? And folks who volunteer regularly, even if they don't show up every single week, do they always raise their hand to volunteer at every event you put on? Do they show up, frequently enough that you know who they are and help out a lot with volunteering? That's your core group.
Okay, so that kind of introductory material and some frequently asked questions aside, I'm going to be kind of introducing you to the central thesis of the presentation, and where kind of the bulk of our research went into, and that is, why do people come to the table and how do they play this game together? I want all of you to consider our presentation as using the extended analogy of board gaming. Many people are familiar with board gaming, and different people come to play that game just like people come to play the SCA game for different reasons, and that's kind of what we're going to get into. So Quandric Foundry is a research organization, and they did a survey of something like 400,000 different gamers from across the world, so multiple countries, not just North America. And when they sorted out these responses to their surveys, they discovered that in general, there were these 12 different motivations that drove different kinds of people to play games. I think specifically the survey was about video gaming, but it applies just as much to any other kind of game. And they found that there were these 3 clusters of types of motivation. There were action and social clusters here in red. There were the mastery clusters up here in blue, and there was the immersion creativity cluster here in yellow, including motivations like fantasy, being motivated by design, being motivated by story. And so you can kind of see how these things are connected. And what we're going to do in this presentation is just focus on these high-level clusters. So mastery, social, and creativity or immersion as these 3 major types of players. But obviously, you can revisit this to explore these different motivations more in depth. And it's really important to note that when we are calling somebody a particular kind of player, that doesn't mean that that is all that they are. It is rarely that a person is 100% one kind of player, so we have some examples. Jordan here is mostly an immersion player. Mostly they come to play for the immersion in the theme or the story, but of course Jordan wants to also do well and be friends with the other people they're playing with. Alex is almost exclusively a social player. They are mostly interested in the fun time that they're having at the board game table. They don't necessarily master all the rules of the board game. They might not really care that much about winning or losing. They're there because it's fun to play with their friends. Sam is mostly a mastery player. Sam wants to win this game. Sam wants to learn the rules so that they can perform as best as they can. And finally, people can be a mixture of all of these things. Sydney here wants to play these games for all different kinds of reasons. Sometimes some games are more social, some games are more mastery. And that's an important thing to remember. We're not trying to assign people one particular designation. But if we're going to talk about these big clusters, let's start with the first kind of player, which is the social player. The social player. So how do we retain a social player? I want you all to think about this like Dungeons and Dragons, which is the pinnacle game for the social player. It involves socializing with your friends, having a shared imaginary experience together. But it's, by and large, it is about having the social interaction with your friends at the table. And we retain social players by taking an interest in them as an individual. That is, we're going to try to be friendly but not nosy. We want to know about who they are outside of the SCA a little bit as well. We want to be their friend before we treat them as just another player. It's not just somebody else to add to my group. This person wants to feel like they're speaking with their friends. And you can connect with them about their interests, about what they do in the SCA, about what they do outside the SCA. The social player might be the least likely to separate those 2 different sides of themselves. because they want to be friends with the people in the group. And any one of you here who have played Dungeons and Dragons know that we always start the D&D campaign thinking we're going to have this high fantasy adventure, but before long, we're just a bunch of goofy friends goofing around in a fun time. Now, how do you turn off a social player? Being a rules lawyer. Anyone here who has played Dungeons and Dragons or any board game knows exactly what a rules lawyer is. They have seen both of these people before. That is, using an info dump lecture. Oftentimes when new people join the SCA, we're very excited. And so we want to tell them everything at once about our art or our garb or about what the different pointy hats mean. And if you have a social player, they're not interested in hearing a lecture as their form of a good time. Similarly, not giving the social player time to socialize in an SCA context. That is, if you pack your schedule at your event full of activity to activity to activity, and your job is to be going, the social player is not necessarily going to get the time that they want to socialize with people in a free form environment. This can also mean things like if you don't allow side conversations at some point when you're meeting as a local group. You want people to converse with each other. Maybe not in the middle of your business meeting, but at some point. And finally, the social player can be turned off by hierarchy. They see everyone else around them as potential friends, and friends work best as equals. And so of course, we want to respect all of the traditions and the titles and the hierarchy of the SCA. But if you have a social player and you are, like, let's say immediately correcting them for not using the correct title for somebody in a social context, that could be something that might immediately turn off that kind of player. And so, rules lawyers, the person who insists on the rules and being correct, you get exactly this facial expression. And the social player loves participating, and there's lots of ways for the social player to participate. One thing that Roxbury Mill has done is having dinner after our practices. Every week we have our martial practice, we used to, and after our martial practice, we would all go out together to IHOP. It was cheap. There tended to be something on the menu at the International House of Pancakes for most people, and they were open late. And so we made it a tradition to the point where every week there were different groups of people going to IHOP, not always the same people. And so we really got a lot of that socialization opportunity, even between disciplines. Also, your populace meeting should include some social time. Lady Nyvein was always worked to include a social hour of our business meeting, and then business would commence. So normally our business meetings when we were in person were like potlucks. So we would all bring something, we would eat dinner, we would socialize together, and then after the social, we would begin business. And this really helped to encourage even the people who weren't officers to come for the socialization and stay to hear about what's going on in the Shire. And all of a sudden, the officerial roles become demystified. There's a lot of transparency in the organization. It doesn't feel like the decisions that we're making are they've just always handled it. They've just always handled it. We don't want that. And Lady Nyvein will go into why later on. Having a great day shade experience is crucial for social players. That is to say, when you're setting up your tent at an event or wherever your local group is going to kind of gather at an event, you want to make sure that there's a good experience, that maybe there's some day board or some snacks that have been arranged, that there are people there for them to talk to, that it's welcoming and inviting. And sometimes what this means, if your group doesn't necessarily have the resources or the people for that, maybe it means that you're friendly with a neighboring group. And when you have that newcomer or you have that social player, you have an agreement with the neighboring group, like, we are going to be welcome under your tent, or like, can I have this newcomer come talk to y'all for a little bit? And that goes along with having a buddy at an event. We really try to make sure that, particularly with newcomers, that nobody is attending an event entirely by their lonesome. If somebody from the Shire appears at an event, if there is anybody else from the Shire there, we're buddies. We're buddies. We're field trip buddies, and that's going to make sure that there's always somebody that you know, because there's nothing worse than going to a party and not knowing anyone there and standing awkwardly and then leaving. And so we really want to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, the next kind of player is our mastery player. Most people also know somebody like this. The mastery player is interested in performing well. They have fun by mastering the game. And so it's really, really important that if you want to retain this kind of player, you give them a chance to do the thing. If you can determine that somebody's interested in performing well and mastering something, you have to let them try it. You cannot talk to them about it for 3 weeks and not let them get their hands on it. And you want to make sure that you explain opportunities that are available for that skill growth for the mastery player. So when you first meet a new person, start with broad spectrums. You really don't want to assume that a male-presenting newcomer is interested in the martial arts or a female-presenting newcomer is interested in garb. Demonstrate all of the things that a person can attempt to get better at, all of the different things that you can try. I've been in the SCA for 4 or 5 years, and I have done poetry, leatherworking, garb. Like, I've done so many different skills that I would not have done modernly. And then when they begin to show interest in one of those activities, it's okay to then back off and let them explore that activity and try it, because what they want to do is iterate and keep getting better. And this player may only contribute to a small part of the SCA, and that is okay. If you have a mastery player, they may go to every armored practice every week and go to the neighboring groups one as well. And they may never go to a bardic. And for the mastery player, that is how they are having fun, and that is okay, because they are still contributing to the success of your group through their participation. Now, there are some things that turn off mastery players. Mastery players value competitions, whether they're bardic competitions or scribal competitions or fencing or armored combat competitions. So if you introduce silliness and shenanigans and like your bit into the competition, a mastery player is going to see that as you trivializing the thing that they think is important about play. Similarly, a lack of competition. If you never provide an opportunity for them to test their skills, then the mastery player might not feel fulfilled. So every now and again, you may want to have a competition. At our local practice, we would, maybe quarterly have a mock tournament at our practice for a similar reason. Socializing interrupting the structured competition is really similar to that first bullet point. Anything that interrupts what they find to be the rewarding part of play. We see this happen all the time in the SCA. And in fact, Lady Nyvein here was guilty of that at one point. Nyvein, do you want to tell the story, or should I?
Yeah, actually,
Okay.
because that's an important point. So what you're seeing here is a picture where I am in that picture. And the picture is of what is effectively a competition. It is for the Academy de Spey. I don't recall if your kingdom has that in Rapier or not. And it's basically a leveling up, and it is a ceremony and a competition kind of all packaged into one. And folks who are mastery players tend to think very highly and strongly that this is a serious and important ceremony. So in this particular ceremony, I brought in a pool noodle and a kickerboard shield because that would, because you were allowed to challenge the person who was leveling up. You're allowed to challenge them in After the ceremony part, they can be challenged by all comers or everyone in their rank who they're leveling up into. So instead of having a serious competition, I brought in a silly competition, and that was very fun for the participants. But afterwards, when the pictures went up on Facebook, I got a fair amount of flack from a number of mastery players on Facebook who thought that I was devaluing the competition, who said, oh, well, it's okay to have silliness, but not in certain places. And an important distinction here is that for a social player, this would be something that draws them in. For a mastery player, it's something that kicks them out. And the important thing to note in that case is that you can't always please everyone. Like, in all honesty, a lot of so we're on like our second personality trait here. We'll have a third personality trait. Those three personality traits, they often want things that are contrary to what the other personality wants. So it's important to pick your time, pick your place. So when this slide saying silliness and shenanigans within competitions turns off a mastery player, that doesn't mean to never have them. Mm-hmm. It means to have a range of what is available.
Yep, and to know the kinds of people that are going to be involved in that activity and knowing what they're looking for. And like Nyvein says, having a range of activities, so every kind of player has something that engages them. And so lastly, for the mastery player, if they cannot see a clear path of learning or progression, you may turn that person off. This is where not understanding what they need to do to get better can become maddening for a mastery player. This is part of why polling orders need to be giving good feedback to people who are on their watch list, for example, or you want to make sure that there's good, solid instruction happening in your local group in an art or martial art, and not simply, all right, everyone, come and we'll just hit each other for an hour and a half and then we'll go home. The mastery player is going to find that very unfulfilling because there is no clear path of progression. And finally, villainizing award motivation. We have had a lot of people kind of bemoan the desire for the cookie. Why do they just care about the award? I certainly never cared. And the important thing to note is that awards are how a mastery player gets external validation that they have mastered the craft. And by denying them that award or saying them wanting that award makes them less noble or less worthy, you're saying that an entire way of playing is wrong. We made these awards for a reason. Let people pursue the goals that they want to pursue. And I will leave it at that. Do not villainize award motivation. Okay. So this is the completionist, the trophy hunter. This is Pokemon, y'all. This has got to catch them all. So mastery players want to get the thing. They want to check the boxes. They want to collect all the badges at all the gym leaders. So rigorous competition is really important. Have opportunities for them to test themselves. Structured learning is crucial. And this is true for both martial arts and for arts. Okay, I am a poet, but I have a Laurel who is the best oral storytelling performing bard because I knew that I needed somebody who could provide me a structured learning environment. I am not going to master that craft by just trying to tell stories until I hopefully get better at it. And a clear path for advancement. Help people understand why they're not doing better. What are their next steps? How can you be more historical? Yeah. So yeah, this is our completionist, our trophy hunter. People who play video games here in the audience are very familiar with completionists, with getting achievements. It is a very valid and normal way to play games. All right, finally, our immersion player. So the immersion player is the person who loves the game because of the theme of the game. This is the person who loves the game because of the story of the game. And so this is your person who's in the SCA specifically because they love history, they love research, they love the aesthetic, they love pageantry. Yeah, absolutely. And We have actually one member in our local group who is very much an immersion player, to the point where she has kind of multiple times stated she has little to no award motivation, and she's pursuing the stuff that she thinks is cool. And for her, being like kind of pushed to perform for an award or being pushed to do something would be very against her way of playing. These are the people that love the flags, they love the heraldry, they love court, they love all of it, the titles. So the SCA has so much cool stuff to engage the immersion player. The immersion player is like the role player. Anyone who's ever played like World of Warcraft or any massively multiplayer games, there are entire servers dedicated to people role-playing their roles. If you've ever played Dungeons and Dragons, there's always the one person who might show up in the wizard robe and insist on yelling fireball. And so some turnoffs for that immersion player, like I mentioned about our member in our Shire, is the pressure to compete. So sometimes in a well-meaning way, we push people to enter competitions or to document and compete with an object or something that they've made. And if you know a person and you know that they're very strongly an immersion player, they do not want to feel like they have to compete in order to play. Can I play in your organization if I never enter a competition? The answer should be yes. The answer should be yes to that. And also obtrusive modernity. I have a picture here of medieval times or whatever, and the example here is a silly one, but every day at our events there are a couple of people who find that things like using phones during court or things like the chain link fence being obvious at the edge of the list that bother them, and that's a really good sign that you might be dealing with an immersion player. This is the person who wants to role play. And talking about TV, great example. You can't always avoid obtrusive modernity because we do live in the year 2021. That is certain, but this does mean that if you know that you're dealing with an immersion player, avoiding some of those things, it can be really, really helpful for keeping that person engaged and involved. And importantly, what one player might find engaging, another player might find not, just like Lady Nyvein said a little while ago. And so that means that you just need to be aware of your audience, which is probably something we'll say multiple times tonight. Be aware of your audience. So how does an immersion player participate? This is a great example from Olam Linnea when she was elevated to the Order of the Laurel at Gulf Wars. She is a member of the early period living camp at Gulf Wars. I don't know if any of you have made it that far south, but for her elevation to the Order of the Laurel, they maintained an enchanted ground and had a period laureate ceremony at the early period living site at Gulf Wars. And that was, for her, the height of her SCA participation. That is creating that historical immersive environment. So opportunities for historical accuracy are huge. Enchanted ground is huge. For those that might not be familiar with that term, enchanted ground basically is any period of time or a place where you are attempting to remove every element of modernity. So this is a place where cell phones, modern lights, modern, your propane tank is all hidden, and you don't talk about modern things. You try to stay in persona. And also shared storytelling, opportunities for universities and learning. Immersion players will go to every university and fill their class schedule and love and love and love to learn. And that's excellent, and we should allow them the chance to do that stuff. So, to summarize section 1, and then after this we'll pause for questions about these kinds of players. Number 1, diagnose where your newcomers' bars are. Are you getting a read that this person is very social and they want to make friends? Are you getting a read that this person really wants to try this skill and they really want to get their hands on it? Are you getting a read that they really want to experience the history, the garb, the learning? Match them with a buddy who shares their play style. I'm going to say that one again. I am not saying match them with a buddy who does the same activity that they do. Match them with a buddy who has the same play style as them. That is much more likely to give them somebody who understands how they play and help keep them engaged. Just because I'm interested in fencing, if I am an immersion player and I insist on doing it in a Renaissance style, if I encounter a mastery player, we may not get along that well necessarily. And of course, have the chatelaine guide that person from their first few weeks into their first event, but do not let those baby birds leave the nest until you know they have a safe place to land. So stay with them, chatelaines. Make sure that they're introduced to people at events. Introduce them to some of the major active figures in your area. Make sure that you're aware that your newcomer is getting the support they need. And for one quick example, the self-defeating chatelaine, I knew a chatelaine who, in an attempt to be very welcoming and open, they would constantly dismiss all of the formal awards, the competitive, all of the potentially stressful parts of the SCA for her. Oh, don't worry about that. Oh, like, don't worry about having garb. Like, just throw on a tunic and you're welcome to hang out. Or don't worry about competing. Like, you can just do whatever you want. And unfortunately, although she thought that she was being welcoming and inclusive, what she was actually doing was shouting from the mountaintops, I am a social player. This is only a social organization. And if you are interested in mastery or immersion, I'm telling you that stuff does not matter. And so we really want to make sure that we aren't playing against ourselves by saying, oh, that doesn't matter. Or like, oh, don't worry about that. What you want to do is just figure out what that person's motivation is and then steer them to things that will engage them.
So section 2, how they play the game together. So we talked about the personalities and the different aspects of our 3 major personality traits, but they're all mixed together in a group, right? There's a whole bunch of you, there's a whole bunch of us, and we're all in one chapter together. How do we play together? How do you get people with differing personalities to play? The answer is keep in mind all the things that we've mentioned about what interests different people, but also there are some basic tenets of how to keep your group and how to keep human beings in a group participating and building the group for the future. Intentional involvement is something that is incredibly important. Most people don't raise their hands to volunteer easily. They really don't. The few of us who do are honestly oddities. Having jobs for people to do is important. Having a day shade so they can help you set up the day shade. Making sure you have different levels of jobs also as I go through these. That a new person who's just their first event, they can help you set up your day shade. It's just putting up a tent. It's just putting up some poles and stuff. Make sure that you help them with it. Don't just be like, oh, here's the canvas, here's the poles, here you go. Help them put it together, but that includes them into the group. A day board. If you bring a day board for food for the event, asking everyone to contribute, making it a potluck. Potlucks are one of my favorite things because potlucks involve everyone, because some people like cooking. Great, they get to showcase their skills. Some people hate cooking. They can go to the grocery store and bring a loaf of bread and a block of cheese. There are options for everyone to contribute something. And if people have dietary requirements, which a lot of us do, I personally do, then having a potluck means that they know there's something they're going to be able to eat there. They're not just going to be stuck eating like the jarred olives that got poured into a bowl and there won't be anything else. Asking someone else to request field space for your day shade is something I don't know if every kingdom does, but here you basically say, hey, we're bringing our day shade. We need a spot to put it, and you reserve a spot. That tends to be a really easy job for somebody to do. It's short, it's fast, it helps them contribute. Helping people bring common items, a water jug, uh, folding tables, things that are just a lot of people just kind of have sitting around. Maybe your barony has all of the items you need. Well, maybe you can, request people to come help load up the baronial trailer. Most baronies don't have every single item, but you can even help with loading and unloading. Even a day of, people can help with toting items from, somebody brought 5 tables. Well, don't make them carry all the tables themselves back to their car. Other people can help them carry those tables. Cleaning up, day of tasks. And the important part for all of these jobs is asking people to do the things. Do not wait for volunteers. It is important in this case to make sure you're paying attention, right? You don't be like, hey, Joe, can you do X, Y, Z? And Joe cannot do X, Y, Z. And then Joe is stuck in the unenviable position of turning you down for something that is, then there's social pressure that Joe really doesn't want to turn you down, but is like, oh God, but I can't really do the thing. So be careful about it. But if you talk to people one-on-one, get a sense of whether they can help. Most people, like I was saying, won't volunteer. They won't raise their hands. And the few of us who do also don't want to be stuck doing all the jobs, because then we're going to burn out. So asking people, even if it's open-ended, so you can have an open-ended question, and then you kind of see the people fidgeting who can do it, and you're kind of like, aha, you there, I see you like contemplating raising your hand. You're not going to if I let you, but I can say, hey, Kame, can you help me do XYZ? And then Kame, who's been kind of like, well, I mean, I can do it, but I don't want to put myself forward, will then be like, oh, look, somebody asked me specifically. Also, things like officer positions, which we'll talk a little bit more later, you can do this for officer positions as well. This is a little known secret. And you can ask people to become a deputy. I would hesitate to ask people to take over intense officer jobs, but you can ask them to be deputies. And the way you do that is by going up to them and saying, hey, I think you'd be really good at XYZ job. I think you'd make a great web minister. And they go, oh, you think I would make a great web minister? And go, yeah, all of your skill set is so perfect for that. If you have the time, and it's cool if you don't have the time, that's totally fine. Just let me know. If you have the time, would you mind being our deputy or even web minister? Because it's a smaller role generally than like an exchequer. So would you mind stepping into this officer role? And if they don't agree immediately, be like, that's cool. You can think about it, let me know next business meeting if you would like to do it. And most of the time they say yes. Because if they're one of your core members, if they're showing up a lot, they have the time already to be participating at an officer level. They want to be participating. They just don't know how. They don't know what to do. But in line with asking people to do things and giving people jobs to do, make sure you show appreciation. People need to feel their efforts are noticed. If they're doing a lot of work and they feel like nobody ever notices, they're going to stop doing that work and they're not going to do more work going forward. Tokens, favors, awards, even an email shout out or an announcement at a meeting can do wonders for just letting people know they're appreciated. Maybe you had to have a small person meeting of just your officers and one person had to rearrange their schedule for it. Thank them publicly. Say, thank you, Clara, I know you had alternate stuff that you really wanted to be, that you had on your schedule and you had to rearrange your schedule. So I super appreciate you making time to be here. Let people know that they're appreciated. In terms of awards, baronial awards are often, they're on a smaller scale than kingdom awards for obvious geographical reasons. And they're also slightly easier because they're smaller scale, smaller group. You have more of a personal knowledge of what's happening in that group. then you want to make sure that awards are not difficult to get. Tokens, awards, favors should honestly, in my strong opinion, should be given out more rather than less. You can always appreciate people more. If you appreciate them less, then they just stop coming. Promote membership. Talking about officers and deputies. Deputize early and often. One of the best ways to get people to stay in a group, to retain your membership, is to give them a job to do, right? So you want to give people jobs to do at events, make them feel part of the group and participating. If they now have a deputy position, which again is less work than an officer position, you can, at least in our kingdom, you can have multiple deputies for any officer position. Deputizing early and often means that person who signed up for a deputy position is more likely to stick around, more likely to become more heavily involved, and they're continuing to contribute to the group. I see a comment that says contributing. Yes, they're continuing to contribute to the group in a positive manner that is helping to grow your group. I would say that about a year in is when you should be asking somebody to become a deputy, asking somebody to take on a stronger role, depending on their participation. Obviously, if they've only shown up 4 times in that year, then you don't want to ask them to become a deputy at that point. But maybe you want to ask them to help plan an event. Maybe they can volunteer at Troll. There's a whole host of things that they can have a larger job that isn't an officer position. On the next stage, you want to transition your experienced people into mentorship roles on purpose. The worst thing in the SCA that happens everywhere is that officers and experienced individuals burn out, leave, they walk out with institutional knowledge, they walk out with understanding of how the group works, how everything goes, and they cannot help build the newer members into participating individuals. If instead you transition your older officers, and that doesn't mean older in age, like officers who have had more time being an officer, people who've been in the game for longer, could be younger people. We have a lot of second gen Scadians. Transitioning your more experienced members into mentorship roles on purpose. You're giving them a chance to step down, to step back, to relax, so that they do not burn out. And you are in that process training new people to step into their roles instead of the new people stepping in knowing nothing about what's going on and having to figure it out from scratch. That makes that role harder, more difficult, and they're more likely to burn out at the end of it if they had to figure out everything from scratch than if you can train them into that position.
If I could jump in, Nyvein, that is exactly what you and I are doing right now, despite the fact that there is no process for it. So I'm the deputy seneschal. Currently, I'm the only person who's expressed interest in stepping up as seneschal when Nyvein's warrant expires. And even though there is no explicit process to make this transition happen smoothly, that is, a deputy's roles or how a transition happens is completely undefined. Nyvein and I have worked out a system where I am starting to do things like make the agendas for our business meetings, getting included on the Seneschal email list so I can observe what's going on, having more and more conversations about what the decisions are they're getting made and why. Our exchequer has started emailing me the monthly forms so I can look at them and know what they look like. Lady Nyvein worked with me to walk through a Seneschal report before I had to do it for the first time. That is exactly what Nyvein is talking about. And I can tell you that I'm going to feel a lot more prepared on day one than I would otherwise.
That's a great point, great example, because contrary, I stepped into the Seneschal role and walked into a meeting, thought that the previous Seneschal was still running it, And then she was like, oh, well, I'm off the Seneschal list and they put you on the Seneschal list. So I guess that means you're the Seneschal now. So I guess you get to run the meeting. And I was like, I what now? So the first meeting I ran as Seneschal, like I was like, I literally found out I was running that meeting 5 minutes into the meeting. So that was not a great start. And it was definitely a punch to my morale and a punch to my confidence for feeling like I knew what was going on and what I could do next. As Ishmael mentioned, we are working together over, this transition period. If you are not sure who is going to be, so we're like pretty sure that he is going to get voted in as the next Seneschal, considering that there are no other volunteers and no one else has expressed interest at this point. If you are not sure, you could also do this transition period after the vote and after the warrant changeover. You can keep your previous officer on deck for a few months to say, hey, previous officer, can you work with the new officer to show them the ropes over a 3 to 4, just a quarter, a 3 to 4 month period. And that's something that even if you don't know who's going to take over as the officer, you can keep that training period as part of your system. And then once you do it a few times, your officers will come to expect it and you won't have to ask them to do it for the next person because they'll be like, oh, well, I got trained over the first 3 months. Therefore, I should train the next officer over the first few months. Another thing is encouraging breaks between officer roles. So, all right, you've got your deputies, you've got your officers, you've got everybody changing positions, it's going great. And then somebody steps down and then you have an opening for a different job, a different one, right? And that person raises their hand and you're like, are you sure? Because the problem is that people who raise their hands all the time. They don't know how to step back. I am one of these people. I'm really, really bad at this. I have a hard time stepping back and not volunteering. So as somebody who is, maybe the previous officer wants to step up, maybe or raise their hand and say, or the Baron and Baroness or the Seneschal can be like, hey, Joe, hey, Niccolo, this happened actually. Niccolo stepped down from being Knight Marshal for our group. He was Knight Marshal for something like 6 years because we did not have somebody else to take over. Finally, had somebody else to take over. We changed over. The process got a little wonky with forms and stuff. Finally, we had a new Knight Marshal. Niccolo was not an officer for the first time in 6 years. And we had an opening. I think it was for web minister. I don't remember. And I said, okay, if anyone's interested, let me know. And Niccolo raised his hand. And I looked at Niccolo and I said, look, you can do this job if you want to, but I really, really wanted to give you a break. So I would appreciate it if you just thought about it for a few seconds. And if you really want to, come back and tell me you really want this job and we'll vote next meeting, which is what we were going to do anyway. But if you'd actually prefer not to after a hot 3 seconds of thinking about it, then that's great. You don't have to. We have other members who weren't necessarily at the meeting at that specific point who can do this job. It's okay. And Niccolo ended up not becoming our web minister because he thought about it for a few seconds and was like, actually, I do want a break. People who are used to doing jobs will continue to do the job. It's like a treadmill that they don't realize they can get off it. So you want to help people realize, and I believe a lot of you are officers, you help yourself realize that you can get off it. You can be like, actually, I'm gonna take a break. Organizational longevity. Other things that help your group prosper is to have structure. So we're talking about structure in terms of awards, but there are various types of structure, and organizational structure is one of those that is actually really important for pretty much everyone. Whether you're talking about your social player, your immersion player, your mastery player, knowing what is going on is something that really everybody wants. So having a structured meeting, having an agenda before the meeting, whether or not you post the agenda. I honestly only post the agenda occasionally, but I walk into that, I tried to make it a habit. I was really bad at it and I just kind of stopped. But I walk into that meeting, every single meeting, with a notebook, with an agenda, and having other people know that an agenda will be in place, regardless of whether I've posted it ahead of time, is helpful because they know that there is a track to keep on. That we will be going through a bunch of things. If I get to the end of my agenda and I haven't mentioned it, then I won't be mentioning it, and they should bring it up in that case. Also, having meeting minutes for folks who are not able to make it to the meeting. A lot of them still want to know what's going on. And in a lot of cases, you will get people who maybe are like, well, I don't really have that hour to spare. But if you post the meeting minutes, they'll read through the meeting minutes and be like, oh, that was really interesting. Maybe I do want to go to the next meeting. Again, going back to one of our earlier points, it demystifies the process of what happens in business meetings also. Oh, those are the officers, they just talk about stuff and do things. Suddenly becomes, oh, this is what they talked about. This is what they're doing. And you can include announcements in your meeting minutes. Be like, hey, we're looking for this. This is what's coming up. And then suddenly your meeting minutes become, we don't have a newsletter because we're a Shire. We're not required to have a newsletter. We're kind of working on it. Folks are kind of interested, kind of don't particularly care that much. Also because we post our meeting minutes. And honestly, a lot of, from what I've heard, goes into baronial newsletters is meeting minutes. So this is maybe something, because I believe baronies are required to post their minutes in a way that Shires aren't. But having meeting minutes that are understandable for the general public, that aren't just like 3 sentences and a tiny little bullet point, that also helps to demystify the process. And letting folks know, hey, the meeting minutes are in the newsletter. It's not just, recipes and pictures, which maybe some people are interested in, some people aren't. It's being like, this explains what we're doing is helpful. If you make, because you can make other announcements. You can be like, meeting minutes are out, and be like, hey, if you're interested in XYZ, we talked about it in our meeting minutes, and direct people to looking at them. Class schedules also, if you have a class, if you have your weekly or monthly or whatever rotation A&S or martial practice, and you have a class at that practice, mentioning it ahead of time is something that's important. If you say you have A&S regularly, coming up with what you are doing at that A&S practice, and announcing it ahead of time, being like, all right, week A, we're doing embroidery. Week B, we're having a lecture about Scribble. Week C, we're just having open work on your project day. So you can have a variety of things. It doesn't always have to be a class, but having schedules that are announced is helpful. People can decide to come in or out, drop in and out. Also, they don't have to just show up and hope they like what's going on. They can choose, which then helps them save time, makes them feel a lot more excited about coming to the activity. And you actually get more people, because most people are not willing to gamble on something they're not sure about. Another thing is giving officers actual authority over their discipline. So micromanage, most people don't like micromanagers. Some people are micromanagers, and they know that about themselves and try not do it. Some people don't realize. Micromanaging your officers and giving them exact instructions for how you want them to run their discipline, say for A&S, say for the chatelaine, honestly is a detriment. So I'm the Seneschal, which in the Shire is the highest authority. So I try really hard not to micromanage my officers. And I say, hey, Minister of Arts and Sciences, this is when we meet, do your stuff. There can be, and when we started, there was a bit more hand-holding to say, hey, I have been doing all of the jobs as a singular person and I'm going insane, but here's how I've been doing them. And that is that learning period. That is that mentorship period. But once you kind of go past that learning and mentorship period, let them do their jobs. Don't, check in regularly and be like, hey, what are you doing? You can suggest things. I frequently suggest things to my various officers. I think recently I just suggested to the Minister of Arts and Sciences, I was like, hey, we did a Shakespeare reading a few months ago. It went really, really well. Can we put that on the schedule? And they went, yes, that's a great job. That's a great idea. But I didn't say, hey, can we put this on, February 6th at 8 p.m. because they already had something planned. Let officers solve problems on their own. In some cases, maybe you're talking about your web minister in moderating. Maybe you want to step in as a Seneschal for moderating, but maybe there's a conflict with timing. In general, people are able to solve problems if you expect them to solve those problems. If you're like, oh, that is an issue, yeah, I'm sure you can handle it, but let me know if you need help. Then you're not saying I won't help you. What you're saying is, I think you're smart. I think you've got this, but feel free to come back and ask questions. Or if you don't got this, then feel free to come back and I will totally help you out with that. Then also, explicitly teaching new people how we do things here is something that we'll be talking about more on our next slide. That actually having, kind of like rules for a Facebook group, being like, we actually have things that are okay and things that are not okay. And it's okay to have that. Boundaries are important. And interdisciplinary practices. Consciously choosing to mix your streams, say ANS to rapier, rapier to armored, armored to bardic, doing that on purpose helps the group a lot, because humans tend to partition ourselves into like-minded groups that have single center points about what the group is about. Well, geographical chapters of the SCA are built that way because they intermix the different disciplines of the SCA. Your geography defines your chapter, not your discipline, because you get a more robust community when you have different, as you're saying, different personalities, but also different disciplines. When your ANS and your armored folks do interact, you get something that is a stronger, honestly, medieval look, and a stronger community. So team spirit.
And Nyvein, sorry, we got about 30 minutes left, just for time check. Okay.
Team spirit is something that is really important. And team spirit is the first half of an equation. Things that create team spirit are favors, also called flashes, and I love to call them butt flags because people generally hang them on the back of their belt with your heraldry on it. These things make new members feel included early on. We give favors to every new member at the first event that they go to. So it doesn't matter if that is the first thing that they have done, and it does not matter, or if it's later on. Nobody's in garb at our other activities. So basically the first garbed activity that they do, they get a favor that they could hang on their belt as they're wearing their garb. And it makes them feel part of the group. My sister, when she was new, didn't know anyone. And I gave her a favor. She walked in, she wandered around. She was like, I don't know anyone. She's a social player also. So this was, she came with me and I was like, take pictures of me. But then she wanted to go off and do other things on her own. And she wandered over to archery, and the people at archery were like, we don't know who you are, but we know you're part of Roxbury Mill, because Roxbury Mill tags their people really well. And that made her feel really included, because she's like, I don't know these people, they don't know me, but they know what group I'm part of, which emphasizes that she is part of the group. Display your heraldry and team colors, populace badges. The heraldry has a purpose. Like, we love heraldry in the SCA, but it also is really useful. Heraldry was invented in order to be a giant flag waving that said, this is who I am, and this is what group I'm part of. Use it that way, and it makes people feel part of the group. Encourage wearing group colors, particularly at assigned events. So say, oh, hey, we're all going to Battle in the Bay, and one of our members is going to be presenting something in court. Let's all wear Roxbury Mill colors to that event in order to support that member. And encourage, maybe people wear green and white. Maybe you don't have a ton of green and white. That's fine. Wear a hood, wear a cloak. Something that includes those colors makes group feeling. Cheering for each other across disciplines is also incredibly important. That There are frequently competitions and tournaments that try and utilize this. Maybe not frequently, frequently is a bad word. There are occasionally competitions and tournaments that try and utilize a cross-disciplinary structure. If you can do it on purpose, if you can say, hey, so so-and-so is entering this really important tournament. Let's all go crown tourney. There we go. So-and-so in our group is entering crown tourney. Let's all go to crown tourney to support our member. Then you're cheering for each other across disciplines. Doing these things result in group cohesion and team spirit. You do not want to wait for team spirit to organically pop up. Instead, you want to introduce these activities and actions, and that will help build team spirit. And team spirit leads to group identity. We have defined group identity as team spirit in the presence of other teams. You must have team spirit before you can have a group identity. So you want to have things like common goals. Common goals also include going and cheering for your member at crown tourney because you are all aiming for a particular thing and cheering them up if maybe they don't make it through crown tourney. Going to dinner afterwards because it's okay, they're still part of the group and that makes them feel better and that gives everybody a group identity. Making champions and officers of different disciplines cheerleaders for their discipline. You can choose champions in a variety of ways, and I've been in a number of groups that choose them differently. Whatever way you choose your champion and however officers step up, encouraging them to be cheerleaders rather than just the best person. Instead of just saying, oh, they won this tournament, they're our champion, encourage them to be a helpful, supportive cheerleader for that entire discipline. They are on stage now, and they can use that visibility to bring up other people who are in that discipline. And lastly, or whatever, third, having friendly rivals with neighboring groups. We've bolded friendly because this can go bad, so we want to emphasize being careful about this. But friendly rivalries, like if you ever did color war at camp or at school, I know not everyone did color war, where your friend and you would often be on opposite teams. So you'd be like, rah, rah, blue team's better, rah, rah, yellow team's better. But ultimately, like you're still friends at the end and you both go out for ice cream afterwards. That's the kind of friendly rivalry that we encourage, saying, rah, rah, my chapter's better, rah, rah, my chapter's better. But at the end of the day, you both go out for dinner together. It's not a true rivalry in the sense of like, I hate everyone in that group. It is basically waving your team's flags. With the understanding that beyond here isn't bad. The other chapter is not bad. The other chapter is just not our chapter. They're their chapter. They are good as their chapter, and we're good as our chapter. Beyond here isn't bad. It just isn't us.
This example here in the bottom right-hand corner, it's a rather small picture, but it is from a Revenge of the Stitch, which is a 24-hour sewing competition that we have here in Atlantia. And pictured here are a bunch of Roxbury Mill folk. And this is my wife wearing a heraldic dress that she made, where you can see the little Roxbury mill crosses on the dress. And she mostly sews garb, but also fences rapier. We have a rapier fighter here. We have a seamstress and weaver here, and they're all working together on this event. And so every year for this event, we do exactly that. We have friendly rivalry with a neighboring group. We have people from multiple disciplines come together to work together to make an outfit for one of the other members of our Shire. And then that person, normally there's somebody new or somebody who doesn't have a full wardrobe, they walk away with a brand new wardrobe of clothes that we've all made for them. It's a great competition and also a great example of what Nyvein's talking about.
It's also in the next slide as well. Oh, it's not. We've rearranged our slides. Anyway, oh no, it is. It's the bottom picture. It is the bottom picture. Oh, thank you. Here we have a fencer, a scrivener, a seamstress, a combat archer, bard, a weaver, and card wainer. That was our Revenge of the Stitch team. And the person who is getting the garb made for them is a new person who does not have very much garb and especially does not have fancy, nice garb. And what we do every year, well, except for this year, is we pull a name out of a hat, actually. We say, hey, new folks who does not have a lot of garb, we're going to put your name in a hat, and we pull a name out of that hat, and whoever wins out of that drawing is the one who the garb is made for, obviously making sure that they can make it to the event. And we consciously put together a team. We don't just have a team of sewing laurels. We don't just have a team that is, a couple of people on that team are very high quality sewers, but we do not purposefully put together a team filled only with the best possible sewers that we have. And we do the same thing for Panzik for the 5-man rapier competition. We have a number of rapier players, and instead of going around and saying, all right, we need our highest level rapier fighters, we say, all right, Roxbury Mill, who's going to be at Panzik? And we put together a team of our players, and that means that we might not be as likely to win. For Revenge of the Stitch, we've gotten really close. We've gotten really close for that one. For the 5-man competition at Panzik, most of the teams are stacked, and we generally do not get very close. So instead, we put together goals for our team saying, hey, look, we have built this team not to necessarily win the competition, but to put on a good showing, to have fun with each other, and to do the best that we personally possibly can. And that helps keep up team spirit. Everybody's working together, and it gives more of that group identity. Back to the top of the slide, for respecting individuals is something that is also important to keep in mind. That modern experience doesn't stop at the door to practice. So the top picture is another one of the, and I'm blanking on the word here.
Prize fights.
Thank you. It's another prize fight, which is what we were talking about earlier with the pool noodle swords. Another prize fight, and the competition that's going on is a knot tying competition. That the person on the left, it was their prize fight, and we put together a competition that we knew he could easily participate in. And I'm on the right, and I am not dressed for fighting because that was not my job at that event. I could not fight at that event. So we made a competition that allowed for modern experience, said, hey, you're a Boy Scout, you're really good at this, and brought that into what we were doing, but also then allowed me to participate in the challenge when I otherwise would not have been able to. And allowed other people in our group to challenge him at this prize fight, that he could have his friends who were not rapier fighters and could not challenge him with rapier, could challenge him with knot tying. So we allowed for modern experience, but it also allowed for cross-disciplinary interaction, bringing to the second bullet point that cross-disciplinary respect is explicitly built by interaction. That as much as you can say, oh, we don't call, we're not going to use the term stick jocks around here, right? We're not going to call you wire weenies. You can say that, right? You can be like, don't use that term, that's bad. But people can still think it in their head, and you don't want them thinking it. And the way you stop them from thinking it is by having people actually interact with each other. Is you have competitions and you have activities like going out for dinner where they will actually talk to the people in the other disciplines. Social cohesion has two halves to it. The first half is explicit social norms. You want to correct new people if they make a misstep. There must be things in your group that are not okay. This is going back to boundaries. Boundaries are important. We're all learning that slowly over time, I think. But boundaries don't have to just be about things that are like really, really bad. Boundaries can be about things that are smaller, that are important, even if you're like, even if they're not, like evil. For example, raucous side chatter in the business portion of a business meeting. Well, you're not going to be like, oh, you're an evil person for chatting during the meeting, but it disrupts the meeting. It makes it harder for other people to hear. It derails, it makes your meetings go longer, and nobody likes long meetings. So, not having side chatter is really important. So, if somebody starts chatting during the meeting, you can say, can you quiet down to continue with the meeting? You can call them out. They're doing something wrong. And you can say, hey, nicely, you're doing something wrong. Let's bring it back to the meeting. And that's okay as long as you're tactful and your response is proportionate to whatever the misstep was. Another thing is disrespecting or dismissing other disciplines, identities, SCA experiences is something that can happen in a way that you don't necessarily notice. Making assumptions about the different disciplines or the people who participate in those disciplines, then that's something where you can say, hey, it sounded like you made that assumption. I just want to clarify if that was what you meant, and maybe we can come up with a different response. So again, I'm going to use myself as an example. If I made an announcement, we had some issues with like in the space we were renting on Wednesday nights. With some like paper towels on the floor in the bathroom. They got to me and they're like, hey, folks are leaving paper towels on the floor instead of making it into the trash can. And I was like, that's a problem. So I made an announcement. In that announcement, I basically insinuated that it was the armored folks who were doing this, and which may or may not have been accurate based on the demographics of our practice, but this was not something that I should have done. And Ishmael actually came up to me afterwards, was like, did you notice you did this? And I was like, I did not notice I did that. That's great. So I apologized to the armored folks later because I was like, all right, fair point. And I went back and was like, hey, sorry. It sounded like I made this assumption. I did not mean it that way, and blah, blah, blah. And it was fine. But correcting yourself is actually an important aspect to this, that as the leaders of the group, if you correct yourself and if you publicly correct yourself, that makes it easier for other people to correct themselves as well. Because it's not like you're just like, oh, you've been a bad small person and the leadership is going to come down on you. You're like, hey, it's part of our culture. We correct ourselves. That helps avoiding this will avoid self-selection bias. And it helps make sure that your group, when new people are coming in, you're not just getting the same type of people and you're not creating a bubble. Implicit social norms is the second half of social cohesion, which I already started mentioning. Correcting your own behavior is important. But you don't just have to do that explicitly. You can do that implicitly. For instance, what traits are you encouraging when new members join your social circle? What are you allowing to happen? What are you not allowing to happen? Notice how the social flow of your group works, because you're telling them this is how we do it here, simply by your actions. What actions do you do? Do you have a cool kids table when you go to feast? Do all the same people sit at a table and all your newer folks sit at a different table? Or do you purposefully intermix? Say you can only fit six people at a table. Do you make sure that 6 people are not all from the same household? Do you make sure that they're a mixture from your chapter and mixture of disciplines and different people can interact? Do you let a feud run your local group's culture? That gets more difficult depending on who and what the problem is. But in some cases, there are ways to bring it off screen and say, hey, you seem to be having this issue. Maybe don't post it on our Facebook group all the time, because it's really not an issue that everybody needs to be part of. What you're saying is not this is how you're supposed to play, but this is how we play in our group.
And I would add just that a lot of these suggestions that Nyvein is making are things that, like, her and I and other members of the Shire have explicitly made these choices in in practice. So we have been at events, and Nyvein is a very good friend of mine, and our friend group wanted to sit together for feast, and we see that there's a smaller group of members of the Shire who this might be their first or second event, and Nyvein and I have to look at each other and be like, okay, we're going to split up, and you're going to take two of them and I'm going to take two of them, and we're going to make sure that they're mixed up. And that is us explicitly having the conversation that we want to be this kind of group. So I'm not going to sit with my best friend at feast tonight because I feel that it's more important to promote the group. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
making little sacrifices. And in that vein, I failed to mention earlier with giving flashes, favors to new members. There are times when myself or Ishmael have literally taken off our favor and handed it to a new person if we did not have a favor available to give to them. If somebody showed up to an event and we're like, "Hi, we didn't expect you," and they don't have a favor, we have given them ours because everyone knows who we are. We don't need it. We do not need that favor for folks to know us. We don't need that favor to feel part of that group. We already feel part of that group. So we have literally said, "Oh, you don't have it. I'm so sorry. Here, take this one." And that it does the same thing. And then that even more encourages folks that they feel like they're part of the group. They're like, "Oh, wow. Okay, cool." So it's our section 2 summary. Give people jobs. Don't wait for volunteers. Group officers should uphold a group procedure. Cheerlead across disciplines and be explicit with your social norms. So we have 2 more slides of FAQs, and then we'll get the question and answer. We are running a little.
I think we're going to get there.
But
I think we're going to get there.
do you want to give the conclusion?
Oh, I'm not sure if we even necessarily need the conclusion. We've kind of summarized our 2 sections. But basically, we want you to do these things because it will make every part of the SCA experience better for your membership and by extension, your entire kingdom.
But as a last point, that last line on the slide, keep in mind, you won't keep everyone. You won't. People will drop out of your group. New folks will walk in, decide it's not for them, and leave. That is okay. You have to be willing to let them go. Groups cycle in size and membership all the time, whether it's because of mundane life becoming suddenly a dumpster fire for whatever reason, or because their interests shift, or because they thought they were interested, but maybe they're not quite as interested as they thought they were. They're just trying it out. That's fine. That's a good thing almost, because we want everyone to be unique and varied human individuals and be a diverse group. And you want your group to want to be there. If your group doesn't want to be there, then what are you all here for? So we have a number of questions about changing entrenched cultures. Roxbury Mill did start with about 10 people, so we did not have a very strong culture starting us off. One of the main responses I frequently give is be the change you wish to see. Okay, so not everybody is going to follow all of the advice or suggestions we have in this PowerPoint, and you can't go up to somebody who wasn't even in this class and say you should be doing X, Y, Z. But if you start taking these actions, then that will help propagate the change across your group. Again, start small. Start with a potluck. Maybe we've had a question where they say, "Oh, well, there's one person always cooks for events," and they would be really, really upset if we asked them not to cook. Okay, so instead of immediately going from this one person always cooks to potluck, because maybe a lot of members are also now used to not cooking and they kind of like it because it's easier, then you have one newer person, and you can say, not necessarily newer, you have one person who doesn't necessarily cook. You can say, "Hey, well, I just went off track with this. I'm sorry, backing up. You or somebody who you've brought into this concept who likes cooking, if you don't like cooking, can say, 'Hey, I really have this dish I've been wanting to make. I'm going to bring it to the event so everyone can try it.' And then suddenly you have this person who always cooks and this other person. And then later on, you can have another person go, 'Oh, hey, I've really been wanting to cook this dish also.' So you have the person who always cooks plus this person plus another person. And it slowly built into something where it's okay for it to turn into a potluck. And you make sure that this person who has been cooking for a very long time also feels appreciated. Maybe they get a token or an award for always doing this thing. You can also then let them off the hook that maybe they're actually really tired of always being the person who cooks for every event. And maybe they would appreciate not cooking if they knew that somebody else would cook. But instead of turning it into a whole big thing, you can slowly slide into it. Which brings us to the third point, being consistent and patient. Start small. Maybe start with asking new folks to help you set up a day shade and showing them how to do it. And then after a couple events, you ask them to do it without help. Patience, again, as on one of the early slides, patience is really, really important because if you try and run into this really, really fast, then it'll look like a much bigger change and you'll generally hit a brick wall. People don't like to change. No, really nobody. Nobody likes change. Like regardless of how open some people feel like they are to change, like I feel like I'm pretty open to change. Human beings actually don't really like change. So the slower and more patient you are, the more likely you can just slide into these changes rather than running into a brick wall of this is how we've always done it. Also, you can change the perspective, reframe changes as investments. Maybe that person who's been cooking doesn't actually really want to keep cooking. Instead, they can help train new people. Maybe they can start a cook's guild with their extra time and they can help build up the cooking in your chapter. Play to human nature. Maybe the person who always sets up the day shade like really doesn't want to set up the day shade. If you say, hey, person who always sets up the day shade, can you help these newer folks set up the day shade and show them how to do it? Then next time the newer folks can set up the day shade. Then also, as your fourth thing, be gregarious and outgoing. If you're trying to change in a group that does not want to change, then you should recognize that there are different types of power. Regardless of your office or position, if you are gregarious, outgoing, and friendly, then you have social power. And you want to use that as a good thing rather than for, taking over the world. If you have resistance against your ideas, stay friendly but firm. Okay, you're suggesting something that not everyone likes. Instead of being like, sucks for you, be like, that is a good point. I mean, like the number of times that I really want to tell people that, like, whoa. But instead, you say, that's a really good point. You make some good points. Maybe you can incorporate some of those good points into whatever the changes you're trying to do. Maybe you can't. And instead, you acknowledge their perspective and say, okay, we're still going to do it this way, but I thank you for your perspective. As our last point, positive social groups become magnets for new people. So you really want to disarm entrenched toxicity. Gregarious, outgoing, social power really helps with that. That I guarantee you, people are walking in the door in your group. You get new people that look at your website, that walk in the door, that a friend brings somebody over, and they are coming in your door. Marketing and outreach is generally not the biggest issue. It's that the people who walk in walk out again. What you're looking at is you want to create a culture where they want to stay. And by having a positive social group, then they're more likely to want to stay.
So to finish up, we get a lot of questions about rural, sparse populations. I know that Eldermere is geographically quite large and sometimes lack infrastructure. We're quite lucky. We live in a county of 1 million people. And so we want to give you the example of our Barony of Windmaster's Hill in Atlantia to finish up, and then we can take questions as well. That basically, the Barony of Windmaster's Hill covers an enormous amount of North Carolina, which is a large state by our standards, and it contains 5 cantons. And each of these cantons has its own little personality, its own heraldry. You might say, oh, I'm from Elvegast. I'm from Buxton on Enno. That is a canton in Windmaster's Hill. And so the point here is that Windmasters is not monolithic, and it's building a positive culture in a decentralized way. And particularly for people in rural areas, you might find that this is a good example for you all to use. Their excellencies of Windmaster's Hill traverse the 5 cantons and kind of do circuits to be seen by everyone in their area. And occasionally they'll come together for group activities. But there's kind of the same way that Nyvein and I, we identify as members of the Shire of Roxbury Mill, but when we go to Penzic War, we are Atlanteans. We feel that sense of larger group identity in the presence of other large groups. I'm not like, oh my God, yes, I'm an Atlantean, until I'm around people from the mid-realm, right? And it's the same thing here. So you might find that you can still create a lot of this group cohesion, even if you have to do it over long distances, and even if it isn't all the time. Your membership can share like pride in Rising Waters and also pride in Eldermere at different events for different reasons. And finally, you don't have to have everything that we're talking to you about all at once. Just like Nyvein said, start small. A small t-shirt drive, make that really nice Rising Waters logo, y'all. Run a lunch, something that can pay for a small improvement, and it's all incremental. It's all going to be incremental. I think that's everything. Here's a selection of Shire folk at the Renaissance Festival and wearing all of our Shire logo swag. What questions can we answer for you?
Yeah, if you want to recommend us to your neighboring baronies, to non-neighboring baronies, if you have friends across the known world, feel free. Send them our email, tell them to contact us. And we are happy, yes, thank you. We are happy to give this presentation to more folks, and we're willing to work with time zone differences.
Yep.
There is always a time that will work for everyone, even if you have to work at it.
Thank you so much for coming. This has really been a fantastic presentation. I understand entirely what Reese was talking about when he was saying we have to get them in the barony to give us their presentation. This is really fantastic. I agree. Runa has written, love for more people to hear what your message is. And Runa has been singing the grassroots song for a couple of years now. And it's something that I agree. I mean, it's not, if it comes from the bot, it sounds like a thou shalt type of message, when really it needs to be about people and less about rules and policy, but more, how people's attitudes and how our culture can work to support each other and support the community. And I think this has been really good. Thank you so much for coming to Rising Waters.
Yeah, thank you for listening to us.
Yeah, and thank you for having us.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you again. I mean, I'm reiterating what Her Excellency said, but thank you for answering my email. I'm so happy that you got into contact and allowed for us to do this, and allowed me to record this so that potentially it could be shared with other people.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.